see, I have a couple different designs drawn here. The most common three types of geometry you see in kitchen knives are the combo grind, the S grind, and the full flat grind. My personal favorite is the combo grind. I feel it is the easiest for me to do. It sheds well and it has good cutting ability with strength, and it can be fairly light. The really popular one right now, kind of the flavor of the week, and a really good grind is this S grind. The idea behind the S grind is that you have removed material in the middle of the knife through these two very broad hollows, and what that does is it not only lightens the knife, but it gives airspace for food when you're cutting into it. The combo grind does something similar. When you cut into this, it widens out relatively quickly and then drops off into this taper. So food tends to get air behind it and not stick to the knife as strongly. That's even more true with the S grind. It is a major issue with the third common grind, which is the full flat. This is just a very thin, full height flat grind, sometimes to zero, sometimes to almost zero. These tend to cut really, really well in things that aren't sticky. Vegetables, if you're doing lettuces or things like that, these tend to cut in just all day long. For a universal knife like a chef's knife though, I think one of these two grinds is the way to go. I've done some S grinds and I've played with them and I've used them in my kitchen, and I didn't see a whole heck of a lot of difference. Basically now I only use an S grind because I can charge an extra $150 or $200 for it. So it can be worth it for that reason. But you do need a special platen to be able to do that. The combo grind, I find you can actually make lighter than any of the other grinds because of this secondary flat up here. I shoot for dividing the knife into thirds, so 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. The top third here is actually parallel here. And I can make that parallel my full distal taper all the way out to the edge, or point. And because I'm doing that, I can actually remove quite a bit of weight. The secondary, without sacrificing stiffness, the second grind is a full height flat grind before I grind my radius in my flat. And this does most of the work of the stiffness of the knife. This is what holds kind of the whole knife together in terms of stiffness and in terms of how thin it is behind the edge and cutting ability. So you can balance it within this third. The last third down here, that's the business end that does the work, and generally I want that as thin as possible, so I tend to take that convexity back at least a third of the way, at least a quarter. In reality, this isn't really what my knife cross-section is going to look like, because I'm going to get some kind of overrun when I slack belt the edge in. I always end up, a little bit rounded like this, and then rounded here, so my actual shape is more like that, with a flat in the middle. And that still works really, really well for me. And I have these down so they're pretty easily done for me. And then my secondary bevel on these is usually between 20 to 22 degrees, and I sharpen them to the point where they're shaving hair, cutting paper easily, but not crazy fine. I want to have a little bit of tooth left to that edge, so that if you're cutting flesh or cutting something that it requires a little bit more tearing action, the knife will still perform very well. These are some designs you see commonly. This is what would be on a Yanagiba or some of the other Japanese knives. These are directional cuts, so these are only designed to cut in one direction, and they're not a universal cutting edge. In the case of a Yanagiba, you're cutting fish towards you, this side toward the fish, this side up, and it cuts a very thin, even slice. And they're great for that, but they're bloody useless for everything else. The other thing you'll see a lot is like on a Deba or on a European style cleaver, you'll see something that's basically parallel with the radius edge, maybe a third or quarter up the knife. And they suck for everything except acting as a cleaver. In the case of a Deba, it's for chopping down big pieces of fish, but in the case of a European cleaver, it's for just chopping whatever you have. And they work great for that. What they don't work great for is anything else. So you want to make sure you're balancing your your thickness and your shape toward what the task of the knife is. In the case of kitchen knives, that's pretty easy to determine most of the time. Especially with something like a chef's knife, it's going to be any task you're going to use it for in the kitchen. You want to try to balance it so it can do all of those things. And the nice thing is, since they're so thin behind the edge, you can leave them very, very hard and get quite a bit of performance out of them without sacrificing strength. As long as you leave enough to not be chippy, you're fine. And you can just determine that through testing. These particular ones, something you see quite often with a lot of makers doing these full height flat grinds that are very, very thin. And honestly, they don't perform very well. They get a lot of stiction in the cut, they're not very strong, and they're not robust, they're not stiff. So they work fine if you're doing something like a fillet knife or a boning knife or something like that, where you don't care so much if it's strong because you're going to be using it in a delicate way. But for a general chef's knife, I would highly stay away from a full height flat grind. If you guys have any questions, put them in the comments and I'll do another video. But this is the basic idea of what geometry means in terms of kitchen knives. Really what we're talking about is the shape of this and the thickness here. Here to here, that's where all the business happens and that's where all the work happens. So really we're talking about how thick and what those angles and shapes look like. That's the geometry. When somebody says geometry of a knife, that's really what they're talking about, is that last third of the edge. So, see you next time, guys.